they didn't tell me. And so we shot the pilot under those pressures for everybody else. I didn't know about it. You know, there was enough pressure.
Ed O'Neill, the iconic star of Married with Children, has finally broken his silence and revealed the truth about what really went on behind the scenes of the legendary sitcom. For years, fans speculated about the cast's off-screen dynamics, rumored tensions, and unforgettable moments that never made it to air. Now, Ed is pulling back the curtain, confirming secrets that will leave audiences stunned. The answer to what truly happened on set is more surprising, dramatic, and entertaining than anyone ever imagined. For years, whispers floated around Hollywood about the tension simmering behind the crude laughs and outrageous antics of Married with Children. On screen, the Bundy family thrived on chaos, trading insults and embracing dysfunction like no other sitcom before it. But off-screen, one particular feud mirrored that same stormy energy, only this time, it wasn't scripted. O'Neill, the face of the show as Old Bundy, has finally hinted at what really unfolded, and his admission sheds light on a rift fans had only guessed at for decades. It wasn't the whole cast at odds, far from it. By most accounts, O'Neill enjoyed warm relationships with his TV family. Katie Sagal, Christina Applegate, and David Faustino all spoke of the near-instant chemistry they shared. Sagal even recalled how, during the pilot phase, the show tested other actors as the Bundy children, but the spark wasn't there. It only came alive when Applegate and Faustino stepped in just before the show's official premiere in the spring. From that moment on, the four of them bonded into a dynamic that carried the series through its 11th-season run, ending in 1997. Yet while that chemistry anchored the Bundys, something far less friendly was unfolding between O'Neill and Amanda Bass, who played their sharp-tongued neighbor, Marcy. According to O'Neill, the hostility didn't begin with one explosive moment, but built gradually as their personalities clashed, his gruff, no-nonsense approach rubbing against Bass' increasingly outspoken nature. Eventually, the tension boiled over in a make-up room argument where both hurled insults until O'Neill snapped, threatening to use his star power to have her removed from the show. In hindsight, he admitted he regretted pulling rank in that way, though he never expressed remorse for disliking her in general. For him, the animosity was real, not just a product of long shooting days. The divide deepened when Bass married during the show's run. She invited nearly every cast and crew member to her wedding, except O'Neill and Faustino. When pressed, she reportedly told O'Neill she feared he'd laugh as she and her bride walked down the aisle in matching tuxedos. O'Neill swore he wouldn't, though even his reassurance came with a smirk he couldn't quite hide. Bass' exclusion made clear how fractured their relationship had become. Fueling speculation further was a question of whether O'Neill's behavior hinted at something deeper. Was he uncomfortable with Bass' sexuality? She was becoming increasingly open about being a lesbian, and O'Neill himself once admitted that this shift made their relationship harder. Critics saw irony in the fact that years later, he returned to television as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, patriarch of family that embraced an openly gay couple at its heart. To a new generation of viewers, O'Neill became a beloved figure precisely for a role that championed acceptance. Yet despite the feud, the rest of the Bundy cast thrived with him, their bond lasting long after the show's end. Bass, however, remained on the outside. Now, with talk of an animated reboot of Married with Children stirring excitement, fans wonder whether this long-standing tension could finally be put to rest or whether the feud still lingers. Long before O'Neill became Old Bundy, the frustrated shoe salesman who made audiences roar with laughter, his life looked very different. Born in Youngstown, Ohio, on April 12, 1946, he grew up in a working-class Irish Catholic family with roots tracing back to immigrants who had arrived in America in the mid-1800s. The steel mills and construction site of Youngstown were part of his world from an early age, and by 14, Ed was already trading textbooks for hard labor, taking jobs in construction before later working shifts in a steel mill. That early grit stayed with him even as his path veered from sports to the stage. Football was his first passion, and at Ursuline High School he built a reputation on the field that earned him a scholarship to Ohio University. But life at the university wasn't what he imagined. He majored in history, pledged Delta Tau Delta, and embraced campus life, but his love of sports and parties soon outweighed his commitment to academics. After clashes with his coach and lackluster grades, O'Neill walked away after his sophomore year, already learning that his strong-willed personality could put him at odds with authority. Determined not to quit, He transferred to Youngstown State University, where he once again suited up for football and joined another fraternity, Delta Sigma Phi. On the field, he faced talented opponents, including rising star Roger Staubach, but his future wasn't destined for touchdowns. Something else was quietly stirring within him. The discipline of football was still there, but the theater program at Youngstown began to capture his attention, pulling him toward a completely different stage. By the time he left the gridiron, O'Neal was exploring roles that demanded far more than brute strength. His big break came when he starred on Broadway as a boxer, a performance that blended his athletic background with his growing acting instincts. That role proved fateful. Acclaimed director William Friedkin happened to see him and offered O'Neal a small part in the film Cruising, alongside Al Pacino. It was only a brief appearance, but it marked the moment Hollywood doors began to crack open. More roles followed, each sharpening his craft. He appeared in The Equalizer, a popular crime drama, and took on the role of NYPD Detective Jimmy Popeye Doyle in the television film Popeye Doyle. Though it was a tough act to follow Gene Hackman's iconic portrayal from A French Connection, O'Neal's performance showed he could handle gritty, hard-edged characters with ease. Audiences may not have realized it at the time, but he was slowly building the experience that would one day collide with the opportunity of a lifetime. From steel mills to football fields, from Broadway stages to crime dramas, every twist of his journey seemed to lead him closer to the role that would define his career. The question now was, how did he get cast and Married with Children? From the moment O'Neal began edging closer to television stardom, a very different kind of show was already quietly taking shape. Writers Michael G. Moore and Ron Levitt wanted nothing to do with the polished, picture-perfect families ruling primetime. Audiences were used to the wholesome lessons of The Cosby Show and other series where every episode wrapped up neatly with warmth and wisdom. Moore and Levitt were determined to torch that formula. Their project, first jokingly titled Not the Cosbys, would dive headfirst into dysfunction. It would celebrate the flaws of a struggling, lower-middle-class family, using humor that was crude, unapologetic, and sharp enough to make audiences squirm while laughing. Timing made their vision possible. In the late 1980s, Fox was still a fledgling network hungry to stand out against ABC, NBC, and CBS. Where the established giants saw danger, Fox saw opportunity. Rather than reining in the writers, executives encouraged them to go even further, leaning into innuendo, sarcasm, and situations no other network would dare. That boldness created the space for a family unlike any other to move into American living rooms, the Bundys. Casting this bizarre clan was critical. For the role of Old Bundy, the bitter shoe salesman with endless grievances, dozens of actors auditioned. But in 1986, when Ed O'Neal shuffled into the room, collapsed into a chair, and let out a defeated sigh, an offhand gesture borrowed from a relative, the creators froze. That single sigh captured everything they imagined for O: exhaustion, defiance, and just enough comedy to make misery hilarious. They didn't need to see more. In that instant, O'Neal became Old Bundy. The next challenge was Peggy Bundy, O's lazy yet flamboyant wife. Katie Segal didn't just walk into her audition. She practically stormed in, wearing a tight, flashy outfit and flaming red hair. She understood Peggy immediately, the woman who teased, nagged, and seduced in equal measure while refusing to lift a finger around the house. Segal later admitted she felt the character's rebellious spirit from the start, and that fire turned Peggy into an icon. The kids, however, proved trickier. The original Kelly Bundy, Tina Caspui, filmed the pilot but never clicked with the rest of the cast. Fox sensed the lack of chemistry and took a risk, bringing in 15-year-old Christina Applegate. Her arrival transformed the role. With a mix of innocence and sly humor, Applegate made Kelly both ridiculous and oddly relatable, a teenager the audience couldn't help but laugh at. She later recalled how quickly she felt at home on set, soaking up the sarcastic atmosphere with ease. Bud Bundy went through similar recasting. Hunter Carson was first chosen, but again the chemistry faltered. Then 12-year-old David Faustino auditioned, and suddenly everything fit. Reading scripts filled with adult jokes made him nervous, but his ability to embrace Bud's underdog energy, awkward, ambitious, always scheming, gave the show its final piece. Beyond the Bundys themselves, the series needed a counterweight, the neighbors. Amanda Bay stepped into that role as Marcy Rhodes, the straight-laced foil to all cynicism. Her sharp delivery balanced the chaos, while a dynamic with O'Neill brought an extra layer of satire. Bass later admitted that in the early days, the cast carried a streak of cynicism, but within weeks it transformed into a camaraderie that never faded. Segal recalled O'Neill making her laugh almost immediately, while Applegate described the cast as forming a little family both on and off screen. That instant chemistry, more than any script, gave the Bundys their edge. When the pilot was finally delivered, Fox executives were stunned. They praised the biting humor and undeniable chemistry, but warned that the supporting roles could use more spark. Still, they recognized what they had, a show that wasn't just funny, it was provocative. It didn't hide its rough edges. It dared audiences to be offended. Within only a handful of episodes, Married with Children cemented itself as the anti-sitcom and ignited debates across America. Critics called it crude, parents called it dangerous, and viewers couldn't look away. Fox, once ignored, suddenly had the loudest, most controversial family on TV. And as the Bundys tightened their grip on living rooms, the show soon pushed boundaries too far for some. What happened next would change television forever. In 1989, Married with Children unleashed an episode titled Her Cups Runneth Over. At first glance, the plot seemed typical of the show's irreverent style, Al Bundy and Jefferson traipsing through laundry shops in a storyline filled with innuendo, sly jokes, and cheeky visual gags. But hidden within the comedy were elements that would ignite a cultural storm, a flamboyant gay character wearing a crown, racy banter, and semi-nude scenes that most networks at the time would never have touched. The backlash came swiftly, led most loudly by Terry Ricolta, a Michigan mother of four and sister-in-law to the state's governor. Outraged, she launched what began as a personal crusade but soon morphed into a national boycott campaign. Writing letters to corporate giants, Ricolta warned that their advertising dollars were supporting immoral content harmful to families. Her outrage resonated nationwide, and within weeks, major sponsors like Gillette, Coca-Cola, and Warner Lambert publicly pulled their ads. For Fox, still a fledgling network struggling against ABC, CBS, and NBC, the fallout was dangerous. Ad revenue was its lifeline, and losing such high-profile sponsors felt like a direct threat to its survival. In an attempt to calm the storm, Fox yanked another episode, I'll See You in Court, which centered on a couple overhearing sexual encounters in a hotel room. Deemed far too risque for primetime television, it wouldn't resurface until years later, and even then, only in heavily edited form. Behind the scenes, the pressure was relentless. Ed O'Neill later recalled how every line suddenly carried weight. The pressure was intense, but I think it made the show sharper. We had to be more creative in how we delivered the laughs. Katie Segal described the atmosphere as one of constant scrutiny, where even a raised eyebrow could be dissected by critics. Christina Applegate, barely 17 at the time, was thrust under a blinding spotlight she never expected. Almost overnight, she was labeled a teenage sex symbol, a status that opened career doors but also invited harsh attention she wasn't prepared to face. Yet the irony of the boycott was staggering. Instead of crushing the series, it supercharged it. Before the controversy, Married with Children floated at number 48 in the national ratings. In the seasons that followed, it consistently climbed into the top 50 and often higher, holding that ground for years. Ricolta's attempted censorship had backfired spectacularly, transforming the Bundys from a brash sitcom family into cultural lightning rods. Television critics dubbed it a textbook case of the Streisand effect, where trying to suppress something only amplifies its reach. Fox quickly realized the value of the uproar. Rather than apologizing, the network leaned into the scandal, proudly recasting the show as one not meant for every household. That positioning became a sly marketing tool, a badge of honor separating the Bundys from sanitized TV families like the Huxtables. Viewers who might never have tuned in suddenly wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Ricolta herself later admitted, somewhat bitterly, that while she still disapproved, her campaign had inadvertently turned Married with Children into a household name. The long-term impact was undeniable. Controversial episodes that were later rerun on cable or released on DVD were often trimmed or censored, frustrating diehard fans who felt the raw edge of the Bundys was being diluted. Still, the notoriety had already done its job. The show had secured its place as a trailblazer, proving that television could thrive by tackling taboos rather than avoiding them. But behind the scenes, success came at a steep cost. Grueling schedules, clashing egos, and private struggles brewed tensions the public never saw. As the Bundys roared on screen, turmoil off camera grew impossible to ignore. One of the earliest fractures came in 1989, when TV Guide released a special issue spotlighting the Married with Children cast. To the shock of Amanda Bass and David Garrison, who played Marcy and Steve Rhodes, only Ed O'Neill and Katie Sagal were featured on the cover. The exclusion left Amanda feeling sidelined, while O'Neill chose silence, later admitting that his lack of protest was a mistake. "I didn't think it would leave such a lasting mark." But it did. Their working relationship grew colder, and by 1993 the rift deepened further. When Amanda married, she deliberately left Ed off the guest list, later explaining that his presence might make others uncomfortable. To O'Neill, it felt like a personal slight, and in later interviews he made no effort to hide his bitterness. What began as a professional slight had hardened into a lasting estrangement. Tension, however, was only part of the behind-the-scenes story. Real-life tragedy struck in 1991 when Katie Sagal, then pregnant, lost her baby 7 months into term. The pregnancy had already been written into the show's storyline, with audiences expecting Peg Bundy to welcome a new child. After the devastating loss, the writers had to pivot suddenly. The planned arrival of a Bundy baby was rewritten as nothing more than a surreal dream sequence of O's, meant to shield Katie from reliving her grief. Later, she described it as the most painful period of her life, though she drew strength from colleagues who quietly rallied around her. The attempt to fill that void the following year only made matters worse. In 1992, writers introduced a new character, Seven, Peggy's young nephew, in hopes of freshening the storyline. But fans revolted. Letters poured in mocking the character as intrusive and out of place. The backlash was so strong that Seven faded from the series almost as quickly as he appeared, becoming one of the most infamous missteps in the show's history. The backlash against the character Seven was so fierce that he vanished from the series after just 1 season, with no explanation ever offered on screen. It became one of the show's rare creative missteps, a reminder that the Bundy formula was too sharp and distinct to be tampered with. Even on ordinary shooting days, the atmosphere was far from easy. Each episode was filmed in front of a live audience of more than 3,000 people, which guaranteed genuine laughter but also created relentless pressure. Performances had to land on the first try, and the weight of constant scrutiny hung over the cast. Ed O'Neill shouldered much of the physical comedy, often staging pratfalls, mock fights, and exaggerated stunts that left him with a collection of minor injuries, a hidden toll behind Al Bundy's grumbling swagger. For Katie Sagal, the emotional weight was heavier still. Returning to the set after her personal loss required her to step back into Peg's sharp-tongued, sarcastic persona as if nothing had changed. The contrast between her real grief and her on-screen humor was immense, a balancing act that revealed how much the actors gave to keep the show alive. Yet, despite the strain, there were moments of genuine warmth. Christina Applegate recalled how, amid the chaos of filming and the family's dysfunction on screen, the cast often shared real closeness off camera. Still, the grueling schedule, live audience expectations, and constant public attention created cracks that sometimes widened into conflict. The Bundys may have been America's most outrageous TV family, but for the actors who played them, survival demanded far more than just hitting punchlines. What unfolded behind the curtain was only half the story. On screen, the Bundys became lightning rods of debate, sparking laughter one moment and outrage the next. The show's sharpest edges came to light in episodes that pushed American television further than most dared at the time. In 1989, Her Cups Runneth Over Aid, centering on Al Bundy's search for a discontinued bra. What was meant as absurd comedy instead ignited protests across the country, sparking boycott campaigns with parents demanding that Fox pull the series entirely. Yet, paradoxically, the controversy only boosted ratings, turning the Bundys into cultural rebels who seemed untouchable. This wasn't the last time the show tested television's limits. Another infamous episode, I'll See You in Court, revolved around a couple discovering they had been unknowingly filmed in a hotel sex tape. The storyline was so provocative that Fox shelved the episode for years, and when it finally resurfaced in the mid-1990s, it was already considered one of the most censored sitcom episodes of its era. But it wasn't only adult humor that drew headlines. The series often satirized hot-button issues of the day. The Egg and I poked fun at animal rights activists, while Noam introduced Al Bundy's men's group railing against feminism. Some condemned the episode as sexist, while others praised it as a biting parody of extremism on both sides. Ed O'Neill later explained that he always viewed Nome as a way to lampoon over-the-top behavior, not to endorse it, though the nuance did little to stop the controversy. Pressure from advocacy groups meant that later re-airings often saw dialogue cut or softened to meet stricter standards. Even so, improvisation thrived on set. O'Neill in particular became known for ad-libbing lines during shoe store or bowling alley scenes, with many of these unscripted quips slipping past censors and later being quoted by fans as though they were always part of the script. Guest stars also amplified the show's irreverence, none more memorable than comedian Sam Kinison, whose chaotic energy matched the Bundy spirit and sent ratings soaring. Still, pushing boundaries came with personal costs. Christina Applegate admitted years later that performing in revealing outfits at just 17 left her conflicted and pressured, while Katie Segal recalled filming physical comedy like repeated staircase falls until the bruises were real. By the final stretch, controversy had become part of the show's very identity. Every protest, every censored episode, and every angry letter only cemented the Bundys' reputation as television's ultimate troublemakers. And yet when Fox abruptly pulled the plug in 1997 after 11 seasons, the cast wasn't even formally told. Ed O'Neill discovered the cancellation from fans while in Ohio, and Christina Applegate learned of it on the radio while driving. There was no farewell, no final celebration, just silence. Years later, O'Neill reflected simply, "We laughed a lot, and that's what I want to keep." After the curtain fell, the cast each forged new paths. Ed O'Neill reinvented himself in 2009 as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, earning acclaim and Emmy nominations for playing a very different kind of father. Katie Segal shed Peg's comic shell with her Golden Globe-winning role as Gemma Teller in Sons of Anarchy. Christina Applegate built a new legacy with Dead to Me, though she revealed in 2021 that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, reshaping her career. David Faustino shifted into voice acting, while Amanda Bears thrived as a director and eventually addressed long-rumored tensions with O'Neill at fan conventions. Remarkably, nearly 3 decades after its finale, Married with Children refuses to fade. Streaming platforms like Hulu and Peacock have introduced the Bundys to younger audiences, many astonished that such a fearless sitcom aired in the late 1980s and 1990s. Viewership continues to climb worldwide, with critics crediting the show as the trailblazer that opened doors for The Simpsons, Family Guy, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Katie Segal perhaps summed it up best. "We broke every mold of the family sitcom. The Bundys weren't perfect, but they were real." But do you know that there was one particular person who was never meant to be cast on the Married with Children set? Stick with us, because what Ed O'Neill finally revealed will leave you stunned. As the Bundys were cementing their place in television history, the truth was that one of them was never meant to be there in the first place. Ed O'Neill didn't come to Los Angeles chasing sitcom fame. He was a theater-trained actor from Youngstown, Ohio, who had built his career on serious roles. On stage in Hartford, he played Lenny in Of Mice and Men, a performance heavy with quiet despair rather than punchlines. One night, while O'Neill poured himself into that tragic role, a casting director in the audience happened to notice him. He wasn't looking for television talent, but O'Neill's stillness struck him, an impression strong enough to linger. Months later, when Fox was struggling to fill the role of a beaten-down shoe salesman in a new sitcom, that same director suggested the unlikeliest candidate, a dramatic stage actor with little comedy background. At first, it sounded absurd, but desperation made the producers listen. By the time the call came, O'Neill was in Los Angeles licking his wound from a failed pilot. Fresh from a sweaty handball game at the YMCA, still carrying his sports bag, he walked into the audition with no expectations. Most actors before him had read the part in a Jackie Gleason style, loud, frantic, almost cartoonish. O'Neill went another way. He thought of his uncle, a judge who faced life's disappointments with calm resignation. If the dog was run over, his uncle would simply sigh and ask, "What's for dinner?" With that same tone, O'Neill read old Bundy not as an angry man, but as one defeated, resigned to a life that never improved. Producers Ron Levitt and Michael Moore burst out laughing. For the first time, they saw old Bundy not as a clown, but as a man whose bitterness made him funny. Instantly, they knew they had found their lead. But the Fox executives saw nothing but risk. To Barry Diller, one of Rupert Murdoch's most trusted men, casting O'Neill was a unicy. Katie Segal had already been chosen as Peggy Bundy, and Diller thought she was perfect. "But O'Neill, you can do a hell of a lot better for the guy," Diller said flatly. To him, betting millions on an unknown dramatic actor was a disaster waiting to happen. The producers refused to back down, arguing that O'Neill's performance brought something authentic and irreplaceable to the role. Diller's response was sharp: "Your funeral." Most would have taken that as an order to replace O'Neill. The producers took it as reluctant permission to keep him. Diller retaliated by slashing the show's order. Instead of 12 episodes, Fox would fund just one, a costly test run. If the pilot failed, the series would be buried quietly, and O'Neill would slip back into obscurity. The brutal part was that O'Neill had no idea. He filmed that first episode unaware that some of the most powerful men in television were betting against him, while everyone else on set felt the pressure hanging over every scene. Years later, long after Married with Children had lasted 11 seasons and made him a household name, fate brought O'Neill face-to-face with Diller again. By then, O'Neill had starred in films like Dutch and proven himself far beyond Fox's early doubts. Diller admitted, almost casually, "I made a mistake about you." O'Neill, never one to gloat, simply replied, "We all make them." That quiet exchange masked the truth of just how close it all came to never happening. The role that defined Ed O'Neill's career, the weary, sarcastic old Bundy, was one he was never supposed to play at all.